sitting at the airport, ready to fly to Reno. Welcome everyone to the Rational Independent. This is Nathan Lindorf. And I should point out that it is a slow news day. As is pretty common in the summer months, everyone gets a little distracted with vacations and travel and parties and planning and barbecues and whatnot, and somehow the news cycle just slows down. It's like important stuff just stops happening when it's not convenient to talk about. So the last little while we've been struggling a little bit with Reddit because we haven't really had any standout articles that have generated a lot of traffic. So I picked one that looked a little interesting among the sludge that's kind of flowing through there. It's worthwhile to look at this stuff because it's useful to see how those with woke narratives, how those with LGBT narratives, with gender deviance narratives, whatever you want to call it, it's useful to see how they think. It's useful to see how activists talk when they think they're talking to friendly, already convinced people. It's a chance to see their reasoning a little more clearly, because the way they speak is less, they speak with an assumed sense of understanding. And so they might be a little more transparent, a little more open. Today's article is from an outlet I've never seen before, The Pink News. All right, headline: House of Representatives debate on trans healthcare descends into pure transphobia. We have to talk about headlines. Headlines are used to frame the conversation, and that's a useful way to look at it. So let's look at the verbiage that's used to see how they're framing things. One of the things that they use, and by they I mean leftists, is they inject emotion in order to create emotionally charged topics. Because when a human's brain is flooded with emotion, it actually suppresses logical function. If you want to control someone's behavior, one of the best ways to do that is to keep them continually outraged, continually angry, continually frustrated, continually afraid. And if you can keep those strong emotions coursing through someone's mind, they are going to be much easier to manipulate. This is why debt collectors try and make you angry or make you afraid, because either one of those strong emotions will get you to shut down your logical processing and put them in charge of the conversation. This is why in abusive relationships, you get gaslighting and you get other appeals to emotion in an effort for the one who's controlling, for the controller or abuser, whatever you want to call. In order for them to exert that control, they try and first get you off center, get you off balance, get you frustrated or afraid or uncertain in some way. And by doing that, it makes you more malleable. Now, in the broader narrative context, it's not so personal, but the same technique still applies, just it's a more diffuse process. And that's why you see leftist labels for people who they don't agree with, or who don't agree with them rather, are things like racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, etc. Fat phobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, now transphobia. A phobia is a technical term. It's a clinical term. It means an irrational fear of something. So you can have a phobia of spiders. And if you see a spider, an itty bitty little harmless spider on the ground, it might make it so you don't sleep all night. It might make it so that you are jumpy and touchy, or you have to just leave the room. It causes you to react in an emotionally charged way because your phobia fills you with irrational fears. That's what a phobia is. Here in this headline, House of Representatives debate on trans healthcare descends into pure transphobia. They are accusing people who are on the right, Republicans in this case, who are contesting some sort of hearing on transgenderism. I'm keeping that vague for a second, but we'll narrow in a little bit. Of transphobia. In other words, they're gaslighting you by saying that if you don't agree with them on their policy decision, you have an irrational fear of trans people or transgenderism or whatever you want to call that. That is silly, but it is effective because it helps them frame the device, frame the conversation such that they are the rational, cool, calm, scientific minds dealing with these hateful, irrational, phobic people. It's actually, when you look at it, it's often a case of projection. The people who are themselves the most emotionally unstable in the conversation are usually those who are proponents of the leftist narrative. At not least because if you're in that leftist institutional bubble, you are surrounded by people who manipulate for a living. And they're manipulating you to keep you in the cult, to keep you brainwashed, to keep you in line, in lockstep. They're very ideologically rigid. Now, the headline says there's a debate on trans healthcare. This is an interesting thing because the left, one of the other things besides emotionally charged language, they also are really good with slick marketing labels. It's not killing a baby, it's reproductive rights. It's an alliteration. It's two things we all like, reproduction and rights. Great, sounds good. Hey, we definitely want people to have rights. And if you don't think about it past there, then you default to support their position. Even though if you ask someone, do you support the right of a mother who would otherwise be able to deliver a healthy baby to choose to inject her baby with poison, rip it apart inside of her, and suck it down a vacuum tube? If you don't support that, most people don't, but you find yourself nodding along to the arguments about reproductive rights, you're not thinking critically. And you're going to eventually, I'm a Christian, I believe that there will be a day where we will all be called to account for our decisions and our actions and our lack of actions if we chose to stand on the sidelines in intentional ignorance out of fear or apathy or whatever. So whether or not that's a thing that happens amongst us as we try and wrestle with these political issues, as on a personal level, it's dangerous to be so disengaged that you will just nod along to the glib leftist marketing labels. But we're not talking about abortion today directly. Today we're talking about transgenderism. This is the pink news, and this is the topic. We're talking about transgenderism and transphobia. So the headline uses the label trans healthcare. Well, everybody likes healthcare, and trans is a trendy label. Perfect, that seems pretty good. And they even go in one step further. They make that kind of innocuous. Trans healthcare. That could mean everything from access to / who pays for gender change surgery to whether or not a doctor is allowed to say, I don't treat trans patients. I mean, healthcare is a pretty broad term. There's a lot of different things that could mean. Why keep it so vague in the headlines? I'll tell you why. There's a picture of Jerry Nadler, who's a representative from New York, under the headline, and the subheadline is, or the caption is, New York Representative Nadler sits during a House of Representatives debate on gender-affirming care. Okay, we're getting a little more detail here. Not just trans health care, but gender-affirming care. What is gender-affirming care? Gender-affirming care is the current glib marketing label. We are going to cut up your body and change the drug profile and hormone profile of your body in order to force your body to exhibit a facsimile of gender characteristics for the other sex. Now, first, we have the inherent confusion on the left between whether or not there are two genders or more than two genders. Because gender-affirming care implies that if you were born male and you identify as female, then we should make your body resemble a female. If you're born female and you want to identify as male, we should make changes to your body to make it more like a male. However, there's a big chunk of the transgender movement that denies that biological didactic reality, duality. There's a word for there, but I'm skipping it. Anyway, the biological truth that there are two genders, and they say, no, there are infinite genders. There's so many different genders out there. How do you have gender-affirming care for someone who thinks they're a cat or a demon self or whatever, or no gender at all? Can you make an androgynous human being who has no secondary sex characteristics? And even if you could, sorry, let me just set that to the side for a second. Anyway, it's a mess. Okay, Republicans in the House of Representatives have been criticized for making anti-trans comments during a debate on gender-affirming care. Jerry Nadler said the debate on Thursday descended into a platform for politicians to bully transgender youngsters after several remarks were made opposing trans healthcare. Now we get to the root of it. And this is where we're going to focus the rest of our conversation, because essentially that's what this goes through, and it's very supportive of gender-affirming care for the youth. In fact, the article simply says, well, we'll quote two more paragraphs. Republican members of the House Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on the Constitution and Limiting Government, there's a mouthful, spoke about the dangers and due process violations of gender-affirming care for children, with several branding the medical care dangerous. Their comments came despite numerous studies proving that gender-affirming care can actually improve the mental health of trans teenagers. What we're talking about is that as a society, we have two camps emerging. It's really one side or the other side. And there's less room in the middle on this issue. There's a lot of pressure pushing people to take one side or the other. And I'm going to do my best to articulate both sides in fairness. On one side, I'm going to go ahead and take the pro-gender affirming care. The best case I can make for gender affirming care is that as a society, we should be compassionate for a section of the population that is so mentally disturbed that they seek suicide. And we offer to them, as an alternative to suicide, sterilization and mutilation. And we hope that by taking that option, they will be less likely to kill themselves. That's the best case I can make for them. And you can dress that up in kinder words, but that's factually what we're talking about here. The best argument that people who are activists who support gender-affirming care, particularly for minors, for children under the age of 18, is they point to the suicide statistics and they say, this section of the population is tremendously vulnerable, it's in danger, it's in trouble, we need to help it. And this is the best way to help it, by affirming their chosen gender. That's the best case I can make for them. I think they're horribly wrong, and or they're incredibly devious, and they're wrong on purpose, which is another story. But that is a logical argument that actually has some substance to it. There is room in society for compassion. There's room in society to support the most vulnerable. That's true. You can't just leave it at that. And that's where I come to the other side. The other side of this argument, literally, this is a binary. For all those that gender activists really hate the concept of a binary, this is a binary. The other side of this binary choice is that you are unwilling to allow society to open the door to sterilization and mutilation of children for any reason. That is a door that needs to just stay closed. If you open that door for any reason, it's like Pandora's box. You might as well let it all through, because it's just a matter of time. Keeping that door closed says, we know there are a bunch of mentally disturbed children in this country, and we're sorry about that. We don't want them to hurt themselves or others, but this action doesn't help. And if anything, we can make the argument that it makes it worse. And here's our reasoning why we think it makes it worse. But whether or not it helps or harms the individuals who are suffering in this so far very small minority of the population, when we open up this door and allow society to say, all bets are off, anyone can be any gender they want, etc., then you are going to get ruthless, money-seeking doctors, drug companies, etc., politicians, you name it, to try and target these vulnerable, emotionally unstable people, and anyone even peripherally related to that state. And they're going to try and push as many kids into the state where they feel like they need this gender-affirming care. Because guess what happens? If you take a person, a young child, and you transition them, and you get paid for that surgery, that's money, it's a profit motive, it has to be addressed. You also have the hormone replacement that now has to happen. because they can no longer, they are not equipped biologically to produce the hormones that allow them to express their chosen gender identity. For the rest of their life, they have to take replacement hormones to either express their chosen gender identity, or if they choose to detransition and try and come back, they've now removed the organs that used to produce those hormones. So they are a lifetime hormone replacement patient, either way, regardless of the outcome. That's a profit motive that has to be dealt with. In addition, you get, this is horrible to talk about, but it's true, you get the chance, if you are an advocate of eugenics, if you are on the left and you're concerned about overpopulation of the country or the world, and you're looking for ways to shrink the human population, sterilization is a tough sell for a mentally healthy person. But if you can make the person mentally unstable, mentally unwell, and sell them that sterilization will make them feel better, you can sterilize certain populations. You can take the most mentally unstable, the most mentally unfit. You can take the most mentally unfit and unstable sections of our population and remove them from the gene pool and get paid for doing it. That sounds like a win-win. And as a politician, be shown as a morally virtuous person for doing it. Those are all motives that run contrary, that create a conflict of interest with patient care. There are ethics laws for a reason. And ethics in science says if you have a conflict of interest, you can't make this decision. If you have a conflict of interest, you don't get to run this study. You don't get to analyze this data, because human beings will twist data to fit their own objectives and their own perspective. We all are biased. So the closest thing that we can get to an unbiased observer is someone who does not have a clear conflict of interest. So when you look at this conversation around, as the article puts it, trans healthcare, or more specifically, gender-affirming care for minors, which is what it's actually about, even though the headline didn't want to address that. They wanted to keep it vague. When you look at this conversation, you have to ask yourself, is there a profit motive, a political motive, or a personal power or aggrandizement motive for the person who's trying to convince me? I really only want one thing out of this conversation. Leave my kids the hell alone, period. And this is a hill I will die on. This is why I call it a binary choice. If, as a society, we choose to open that door and government and the medical institutions and all of that say, if your child decides that if we are able to convince your child that they were born in the wrong body, and during the normal confusion that comes along with puberty, your child decides they want to express another gender, you have to let us start to treat them with this gender-affirming care. And if you don't, we will take your child from you. Because if you don't let us do this, you are harming your child. That is the argument being made in this article. If that's the decision we make as a society, then myself and a whole bunch of other people who feel like this are not going to take that lying down. They're not going to accept that. We're not going to sacrifice our children on the altar of your moral virtuousness, of your virtue signaling. That is a bridge too far. It won't be allowed. That is a recipe for the dissolution of our grand national republic. So on a slow news day, they found a way to make me cranky. Yay! Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. That is my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.